The online participants, please wait for a bit because we are trying to set up the microphone and other technical matters. So it will take about 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, no worries, Munas. Thanks.
Okay, Natasha and Anoji, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
You can hear me, right? Okay. Until we set up the sound system, I thought we will anyway start because we are running late and I'm using another device to communicate with you, so you can hear me, so it's fine. Let me start because it's fine. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. We have online participants as well as on-site participants here. Let me introduce the purpose of this discussion and what's going to happen in the next couple of hours. The title of this session is Reimagining Engagement with Migrants of Sri Lankan Origin, Contemporary Challenges and Opportunities. So let me give a little bit of a background context to this topic. So I call it reimagining because the context has significantly changed in Sri Lanka, at least in terms of the social, political, and economic dynamics. It also means that the engagement with the migrants overseas, there are different terminologies used to address them. I will come back to it in a bit. It has also changed. The approach has changed, and the nature of engagement has also changed a bit. You can hear me now, right?
Yeah, we couldn't hear you before, but we can hear you now.
This is not connected, the microphone is not connected. So yeah, so in this context, we are looking at the engagement with migrants of Sri Lankan origin who are located in various places. So the context, when I say context, I mean in Sri Lanka, I mean there are multiple crises that Sri Lanka has faced in the past. There was conflict, and the engagement with conflict of diasporas or the migrants of origin was different. And then there was a tsunami. We saw a different sort of engagement. And there was post-war and post-war development. In the post-war development, the engagement was different. And there were multiple recessions during this period. And then that was different types of engagement. The COVID-19 pandemic, and then the ongoing political and economic crisis, to name a few crises that we have faced. So during each of these crises, the engagement has changed. The context shaped the nature of engagement. So we are going through another crisis at the moment. So do we need to relook at the nature of engagement with the migrants of Sri Lankan origin? So that's the broader question that we are going to ask. But this engagement is not simple, but it's a very complex engagement because the nature of the migrants of Sri Lankan origin is also diverse. So in this context, we are looking at in this session, we are trying to reflect on the current context and how the engagement of people of Sri Lankan origin with the current context, whether this has changed or in what form, and the challenges that they face, and what policy measures should be, there to address these challenges. So the agenda for today is, so after this initial introduction, I will present briefly on about an ongoing work that we are doing at CEPA, just to situate the context and connect the topic to the current context, and then we will go into the panelists. I will introduce the panelists, and then the panelists will speak about on the topic, and we will open this floor up for discussion. So that's the format of the discussion. So we have four speakers joining today. Unfortunately, Pavitra Jayawardena is unable to join. We have Dr. Anoji Ekanayaka, who is a senior researcher at Center for Migration Research and Development. Dr. Natasha Palansurya, who is an independent researcher. And then Mr. Nikaril Kandasamy, who is a senior assistant secretary at the Ministry of Labour and Foreign Employment. And Mr. Nishanta Varnasurya, National Project Coordinator. He works at International Labour Organization on Safe Migration Project as National Project Coordinator. Thank you very much for giving your time and agreeing to be as a speaker. So before we go into the discussion, I'll introduce the topic. I will present the echo. Can you hear Natasha now?
Yeah, we can hear. Thanks. Now I can't hear if you're talking.
You hear now, right?
Yeah, now it's fine.
It's only the computer, but not connected to the sound system. Yeah. Okay. In this study, we are looking at the current migration trends. So I'm going to just show some preliminary insights from the study. Okay, so in this study, we are looking at how do economic and political crises influence decision-making processes and trends in contemporary migration. So just a small caveat on this. I mean, I'm not presenting the entire study here. The purpose of presenting some relevant findings to set the context for this discussion. We conducted an online survey. It's a self-administered survey during May and July in 2024. And we did some follow-up in-depth interviews with a selected number of migrants and potential migrants. And we also conducted some key person interviews. This is how the sample looked like. I mean, we have identified about 31% of them have taken initial steps to leave the country, and 14% of the respondents are migrants. They have already migrated, and 20% have said they have no plan to migrate, and another 18% is planning to migrate. They have not done any preparation for that. And 16% have said they are willing to migrate, but they are unable to migrate. So, I mean, so this is the sample of the study. So this is the context in which we conduct the study, just to understand whether there's this perception, or there's this narrative of, in the current context, there's this a wave of migration. So immediately, during the fuel crisis and economic crisis, the height of the crisis, there's this rush to leave the country, and there's the urgency to leave, and it became even more complicated with state authorities, not being able to cope with some other demand like travel documents, certifications, and other preparation-related material. So it became an issue in the media, and the discourse was also kind of created. And the initial impressions and some of the anecdotal evidence showed that the professionals leave, and which strains on some of the critical sectors like health, education, information technology, and so on. And we wanted to see whether it's actually has changed. The out-migration has actually increased. I'm sharing this figure from the Sri Lankan Bureau of Foreign Employment. The registered numbers, they have increased. If you look at 2019 and 2022, it has increased from 200,000 to 300,000 plus. So these are registered migrants under SLBFP, Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment. But there are lots of people who are leaving, who are not registered. For instance, people who take visit visas and end up in working somewhere else, irregular migrants who go without the documents, and then the students who go with a student visa, and they may end up in working as the type of work might change. Students, their status might change. Professionals going to the West, they are not registering on the SLPFP, and some of the permanent migrants who are leaving, like on the skilled work category, to the West, they are not registering. So, I mean, the question is, how useful are these categorization when we think of engagement? The categories, they identify at the departure point, and then the and the destinations, they will be categorized as something else. And the question is, do the educated leave? From our data, what we see is that, yes, I mean, the people who have participated in the survey, they have bachelors and they are willing to leave. So this is the category of people who are willing to leave, who have made plans to leave, and who are planning to leave. So in this category, most of them are, in the bachelor's category. Of course, the lower level educated categories are also planning to leave the country. So one question we asked is whether the impact on the current political crisis has anything to do with their desire to migrate. About 70% have said yes, the current political crisis has contributed to migrate, the decision to migrate or desire to migrate. So this has implications on how they engage back with Sri Lanka. Right? In the other slide, I also show that what contributed to migration decision. The slide is slightly unclear, but what I can say here is that the factors related to current field have contributed to the decision making. For instance, rising cost of living, declining living standards, and lack of employment opportunities, and quality of life. So these factors are the ones that kind of come in the first. So when people live in this kind of situation, how do they connect back to Sri Lanka? Are they similar to the previous migrants, or their engagement is different? Where do they want to go? It also has implications on the nature of engagement. For instance, if you look at this figure, the blue one is Middle Eastern countries. So it's our usual labor migrant destination. It's about 32%, but that's where they want to go. But they also want to go to the places like Australia, New Zealand, Korea, Japan, and places like that, and Europe. So depending on this place where they end up in, also has an implication on how they engage back. For instance, in the Middle Eastern countries, the nature of organization, mobilization is different to how they engage when they are in Europe or in America. Because of the host country dynamics, law, and context matters a lot. Related to the previous one, the perception on living standard in Sri Lanka. So they feel that the 41% say that they are dissatisfied, 13% say they are very dissatisfied. So over close to 45%, they are saying they're very dissatisfied about the situation in Sri Lanka. That also contributes to the decision to migrate. And then the funding sources, financial sources, where do they get the money from? Most of them said loan, savings, and support from the relatives. So this again, the nature of engagement with Sri Lanka will vary depending on where they get the money from, because if they are borrowing from the banks and relatives, then they also need to remit. The economic engagement is something that they have to look for. So, I mean, what I just presented is, a few points from our ongoing study related to the engagement. How the engagement can shape given the current context. But the Sri Lanka, if you look at Sri Lanka, it has a complex history and trajectory of mobility. So people of Sri Lankan origin are diverse. They are diverse. Numbers. I mean, all of us know that the numbers are very. They're not very accurate, but approximately 2 million live in the in the Middle Eastern region, in one of labor receiving countries, for 25% of the labor force and 1 million permanently live settles overseas, but these numbers are highly disputed. And the they are diverse in terms of categories, and the categories are also very fluid. So we can say there are labor migrants, there are diaspora, refugees, irregular migrants, but these categories are not mutually exclusive. It's very fluid. Sometimes you may call yourself, one may call, diaspora in another context. You say, no, I'm not a diaspora, I'm a labor migrant. Right, I mean, the definitions are also different. I mean, so these categories are different. There are different types of people, different types of Sri Lankan origin abroad exist. So they are also diverse in terms of their ethnicity, religion, class, caste, place, gender, and lots of other factors make it even more diverse. This diversity also means that their engagement is diverse. How they organize, how they mobilize, and how they engage are diverse. And the nature of engagement is also diverse. Not all of them engage in the same way. For instance, there are people who send remittance, social remittance, humanitarian support during crisis and multiple crises, and political engagement. So, lots of ways of engagement, but not in one way. One particular group can engage in different ways, multiple ways. And the other one that I want to leave with you all before we go into the discussion is the diverse labels. So in the title, if you look at this roundtable, I've said migrants of Sri Lankan origin. I mean, it's a very disputed title because you can say they were migrants, diasporas, that's another label. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs uses the term overseas Sri Lanka. And there are terms used to refer to the migrants of Sri Lankan origin, people of Sri Lankan origin, second generation Sri Lankan. I mean, multiple labels are used to refer to, it could be the same group, it could be different. But because of the political sensitivity, the context, the labels also change. Right? I mean, this is where I want to leave you all with before we start the discussion, because we need to, ask the question: how can we understand this engagement, and how do we deal with different types of understanding? So one is understanding, and there are different types of understanding what it means for engagement. So let me conclude this kind of context setting now. I'd like to invite our speakers to the head table. We don't have a table, round table, but we just see the round. We have the panelists, two of them have joined online and two of them have joined in person. And the panelists are also gender balanced at the moment, two men and two females. We have Dr. Anoji Ekanayaka. Dr. Anoji Ekanayaka is she is at the moment based in Qatar, but she is researching about Sri Lankans, overseas Sri Lankans, and her research focuses on migration and development. She has a PhD from University of Colombo, Sri Lanka, where she focused on return, integration, and remigration of Sri Lankan migrant workers from Gulf region. Her work contributions have been published in several international peer-reviewed journals, and she is currently working as a senior researcher at Center for Migration Research and Development in Sri Lanka. Thank you, Anuji, joining this discussion. And we have another panelist or another speaker online, Dr. Natasha Palansurian. Dr. Natasha Palansurian is an independent researcher with a PhD in international politics from City University of London. Her research focuses on family diaspora, transnational engagement in post-war justice. Her expertise spans on peace and conflict, transnational justice, reconciliation, diaspora and diaspora engagement, transnational activism, governance and democracy. Thank you, Natasha, for joining this discussion. And we have another speaker here, Mr. Nishanta Varnasurya. Nishanta Varnasurya is the project coordinator of ILO Safe Labor Migration Program. He has over 20 years of experience in development and humanitarian sectors. And he has worked in multiple projects. He has conducted project management, monitoring evaluation, financial analysis, and led several teams. And he has, prior to joining ILO, he has worked with UNDP, UN Habitat in Pakistan, Norwegian Refugee Council. Thank you, Nishanta, for joining this discussion. And Nishanta holds a master's degree from University of Colombo and University of Wolverhampton as postgraduate diploma in financial administration from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka. Thank you, Nishanta. And we also have another speaker from the Ministry of Labor and Foreign Employment, Mr. Nikhil Khan Kandasamy. Nikhil Khan Kandasamy is a class 1 officer belongs to Sri Lanka Administrative Services and currently working as a senior assistant secretary at the Ministry of Labor and Foreign Employment. He is responsible for negotiating and implementing bilateral labor migration agreements and MOUs, memorandum of understanding, labor migration related to policy formulation and implementation. And he is an active member of National Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. He oversees foreign funded projects and also handles international and regional forums on labor migration. He is an academic law, holds a BSc from agriculture, BS honors, agriculture degree from University of Kerala, University of Jaffna. He holds MSc degree in organization management from University of Kerala. Thank you, Mr. Nikhil Khan, for joining today's discussion. So we in this discussion we have try to set the context for why we want to understand and engagement with overseas Sri Lanka or migrants of Sri Lankan origin. But what we need to understand from, if you look at the engagement critically, one thing that we want to understand is whether they want to engage. From here we say engagement. But one particular aspect that I want to ask speakers is whether these migrants want to engage. So this question, I don't know, I would like to ask Anoji, since you are very close to the group of migrants of Sri Lankan origin, you are working there, you probably have the most experience than anyone else at the moment. Would you be able to reflect on this question? So when we talk about engagement, we should not take it for granted because there are other dynamics, other political dynamics within the migrants of Sri Lanka, the organizations, their motivations and all. Would you be able to reflect a little bit on this question?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Munas. There is an echo. I couldn't hear the question properly.
The question is, Anuji, I mean, so you are working very, you are the most closest to the migrants of Sri Lanka at the moment, since you are also based there. Would you be able to reflect on whether the migrants of Sri Lankan origin in the Middle East or in the Gulf region, whether there's interest, whether they want to engage with Sri Lanka, and what kind of engagement are they, looking at the moment?
Yes,
Sir, audible?
yes, the question was clear this time. Yes, especially with the recent political change, migrants are, yes, they are interested in engaging with and contributing to the development of Sri Lanka. This enthusiasm was there in 2019 also when the government changed. But in order for this enthusiasm to be sustainable, migrants also should receive something in return. During the pandemic, the migrants were kind of left to fend for themselves. There were issues with the repatriation of migrants. There were many migrants who lost their jobs during the pandemic, and they were not properly, their needs were not properly addressed by the Sri Lankan missions in the Middle East. So there is definitely interest in engagement, but at the same time, there is kind of a mistrust, not with just the government, but with the whole migration apparatus. Of course, with the economic crisis, the main method of engagement, remittances, there were issues with the migrants didn't use the banking system, used the undial system, but now things are getting back to how it was. But in order for sustainable engagement, migrants' needs should be addressed, and secondly, there should be that trust should be rebuilt, sort of. The trust that was lost during the pandemic.
We can't hear anything in case you're talking, Munas.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll pose the same question to you, Natasha. What is, you have been working with a different type of Sri Lankans of migrants of Sri Lankan origin, maybe diasporas. Your interest or your work has been focusing on mostly about the transnational justice and political engagement. How do you see, their engagement do you observe a change now in their engagement? If so, what sort of change do you see right now?
Thanks, Munas. Yeah. So let me just, I think when we strategically, I think you mentioned I focus on a different type of Sri Lankan migrants abroad. So when we think of like usually strategically engaging with Sri Lankans living abroad, this group most times falls through the cracks. They are either excluded because it's too political and complex to engage with them. And to be honest, we still haven't figured out what that engagement will look like, or if we even want to engage. Or we might avoid engaging because for the most part, the engagement with Sri Lanka has been fraught with tension and antagonism and is rooted in a violent past, right? So I think that's one thing that's why our focus a lot of the times is not on that group. So I'm actually focusing on the conflict-generated migrants and who are mainly Sri Lankan Tamil. popularly known as Tamil diaspora, but I think Munas also mentioned we've kind of, in academia especially, we have moved on from labeling so rigidly this group as the Tamil diaspora, because one is it denotes that they're a homogeneous group, which they're far from. And also that term, because of the history, has had very negative connotations and has got a lot of criticism, to the point that even Sri Lankan Tamil migrants reject that label. And within this group also, the engagement is diverse. I won't go into it, but what I really focus on, and Munas mentioned, is the group that collectively engages for political reasons. We know this group in academic circles as the Tamil Transnational Political Community. And they were studied vastly during the war and quite increasingly after the war because of this undeniable influence that they have had on international politics when it comes to Sri Lanka. So the engagement has definitely changed. So during the final stages of the war, we saw how there were large groups of Sri Lankan Tamils engaging in protests and campaigns calling for host countries and the UN and other international non-government organizations to end the war in Sri Lanka. And then towards the immediate end of the war, these protests continued, and they were calling for justice and accountability for war crimes. Now, more recently, this type of large-scale protests have been extremely limited. We rarely hear about it. And political engagement actually has transcended the physical spaces. And what we now see is a lot of these activists or Tamil transnational activists engaging online. And then also we have increasingly what we see now is the political lobbying is happening at a higher level. It's happening through closed-door meetings or with host country politicians and by using what we call inside advocates. When we say inside advocates, they're embedded in the host country system because of political integration or social integration, and they're mainly Tamil elites who can directly influence foreign policy decisions by building relationships with political elites in the host country. We also see political engagement from various Tamil-led civil society organizations, or we know them as Tamil diaspora organizations, who are based in host countries, and they mainly engage at the international non-government level with non-government organizations and other NGOs and other groups. And they also, you see these groups, and now it's smaller pockets, it's not big groups anymore, it's smaller pockets of these groups are seen at side events, at UN General Assemblies, or at the Human Rights Council sessions when Sri Lanka is being discussed. And they also are the groups that contribute to keeping the transitional justice agenda relevant even 15 years after the war. So now, even though this type of Tamil engagement, transnational engagement has changed, it's not a mass scale protest anymore. But we should not underestimate the influence that the Sri Lankan Tamils have because of leveraging the power of their vote, especially in constituencies, mainly in Western countries, that they have a large and saturated presence. And because of this, we call it insular integration, it has worked in their favor because they can influence the wider Tamil community to vote based on policies that benefit them in relation to homeland issues. For example, during political campaigns, during election time in Canada, even in UK, we have seen Canadian and British politicians openly supporting self-determination, talking about recognition of genocide, those kind of topics that are very controversial to us in Sri Lanka. And recently also the US Congress passed a resolution supporting self-determination of Tamils in Sri Lanka. So that conversation is still continuing, even though we want to, in Sri Lanka, kind of move on from it and be like, okay, we have other things to focus on, the economic issues, but these political issues are still continuing in different ways.
Thank you, Natasha. I mean, it's good to also hear that that there's the mobilization happening, but it's at different levels, as you say. it has moved from more protest kind of movements to high level lobbying. So that's something for us to come back in a while. So the next, can I also invite the two of you to take this chair? Sorry, I should have done it earlier. We talked a little bit about, Anoji raised the issue of trust in the systems, about the government support and all. And Natasha also raised a different point in relation to, how the state needs to get involved. Can I ask Mr. Nikharil Khan about, so you are coming from the government sector, and you have been working very closely with labor migration in your work. How important is it to engage with diasporas, with migrants of Sri Lankan origin, for Sri Lanka's, to address, the current economic crisis that the Sri Lanka faces, economic, political, and multiple crises that we face? How important are they, in this context?
Yes, thank you very much for the interesting question. Yes, as far as our ministry is concerned, Ministry of Labor and Employment, so we are dealing with a particular those who are involved with the employment. Anyway, they are selected. However, there are some other migrants also influential in the Sri Lankan context. So last year, our government, they have adopted and launched the labor migration policy. That's the national migration policy with the action plan from 2023 to 2027, which was approved with the cabinet. So that labor migration policy, it was formulated with the support of the Social Corporation, with the technical support of IMF. And it has 4 core areas. The 4th core area is the labor migration and the nexus between the national development of Sri Lanka. So that core policy area has clearly identified the importance of these migrants and their involvement in the development of Sri Lanka. And also it has identified some other activities in the action plan to engage with this overseas Sri Lankans. So that's the word we used in that policy document, because sometimes this diaspora words sometimes allergic to some people because of various reasons. So we use that word overseas Sri Lankan. So there is a clear identification that these people are very influential and we have to engage with them for the betterment of Sri Lanka. So in our mandate, we are particularly dealing with the labor migrants. So we know that as per the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment Act number 21 of 1985, it is mandatory requirement for any Sri Lankan, if he want to go for the foreign employment in abroad, he has to register. So the labor migrant, we consider whoever register under the Sri Lanka Bureau of Employment. So the benefit also will be given to those migrant workers. However, as you correctly mentioned in the introduction session, there are more migrant workers are in the irregular situation, undocumented situation, even the visit visa, sometimes student visa, all those people are working, but they are not come under the purview of our ministry. However, as a government, we have a responsibility to deal with them as well with the other line ministries like foreign ministries and other institutions. So for that, there was a institution like Office of the Overseas Sri Lankan was formulated under the President's Secretariat. However, the current government, due to the political change, the current government is of the view that there is no need to have a separate entity at the President's Secretariat, and that has to be done by the Foreign Ministry. So there are some slight changes. However, the government, as a government, is of the view that we have to deal with this anyway overseas Sri Lankan. Because when we consider the economic crisis, we all know that we don't have, if we speaking in the layman language, we don't have dollars. That's the main reason for this economic crisis. So the remittance, workers' remittance is the contributor of the 8% of the GDP of Sri Lanka. And also 80% of the trade deficit also covered by this workers' remittance. So in economic condition, they are playing a vital role. Not only migrant workers, even other overseas Sri Lankans, they are sending remittance to their relatives. So that also coming as a dollars to Sri Lanka. So in economic situation, they are influential. Our government also recognized that, identified that we have to engage with them.
Thank you. Thank you for the remark. I think I mean you identified a clear area of economic engagement and remittance as as a way of engaging. Something for us to discuss in going forward is the other types of engagement. What it means to engage with Sri Lanka using other methods. I mean, you also mentioned the policy. I think it's an important achievement for Sri Lanka to launch this, labor migration policy, which I think is much, improved compared to how it was before. And the action plan also needs has a development angle to it. How to engage the migrants in a development angle. But yes, the limitation there is, that particularly focuses on one segment of migrants, labor migrants. But it does, as far as I know, it does not capture much on the diasporas, for instance, which I understand comes under Ministry of Foreign Affairs as the interventions. So something for us to discuss in the next round of discussion. So let me go to Mr. Nishanta Varnasuriya now. Nishanta, we know that ILO and Ministry of Labor and Foreign Employment works very closely. ILO is a technical partner when it comes to Ministry of Foreign Employment in providing the technical assistance. As an organization that works with the ministry very closely, I mean, what role an organization like ILO? I mean, there are other organizations like IOM is also working on labor migration related issues. What role can you play to better support the engagement of overseas Sri Lankans with Sri Lanka? I mean, how do you see it's happening? What do you think are the critical gaps at the moment?
Thank you, Munas, and thank you for your invitation. So, International Labour Organization is an international organization come under UN flag to ensure social justice through implementing the decent work agenda. So, therefore, migrant workers are kind of an important group for International Labour Organization. So, you presented different labels, but I would like to narrow down it to the labor migration, because in Sri Lanka, with the ILO perspective, people can cross borders for economic purposes. So basically the migration for employment, economic migrants. So ILO treats them to protect them there, and again to ensure the equal treatment and to ensure the fair and ethical recruitment practices. ILO see different challenges. Actually, in Sri Lanka, currently we experience, as you presented, 2019, the average registered migrants were 200,000. But then then we hit two crises, COVID and the economic crisis. Then they increased to 300,000. So still, it's not clear. Maybe because of 2 years gap. So then the backlog came into the scene. Maybe because of that, 200,000 increased to 200,000. But one thing is clear: people try to migrate for economic purposes. And again, there are unregistered irregular migrants as well. So when we see the registered migrants, actually, mostly percentages are similar, but the increase has come to the low skills category, which is more vulnerable. So then migrant workers face different challenges in this nation. One is to wage discrimination. Actually, in estimate, migrant workers get 13% lower than the host country employees. And again, we see there are differences among regions. For example, Philippine nurses, they get more salary than Sri Lankans. And when it comes to Bangladesh, they get low salaries than Sri Lankan migrant workers. So there are issues. And again, the lack of social protection, job security, and the poor working condition we saw during the preparation for the Football World Cup, Qatar. So still people are suffering from diseases happen during the construction of the stadium and all. So there are migrant worker specific issues and again the policy specific issues. So weak policies, weak regulations, and again the informal sector is more vulnerable still. But in Sri Lanka, happy to see now we have comprehensive labor migration policy. But in average, there are issues in migration sector. So then what ILO can do for that? So mainly ILO promote international labor standards. For labor migration, we have established 3 ILO conventions, Convention 97, Migration for Employment, Supplementary Convention 143, and the 181 Recruitment Agency Conventions. So to protect workers, we try to establish ILO conventions in countries properly. In Sri Lanka, we have not ratified any of 3 conventions, but most of elements in the conventions have been absorbed by national policies and laws. So currently we are doing a gap analysis to see where we are, but I hope in near future we can advocate to ratify that policy convention. So then we can strengthen our legal framework to protect migrant workers. And again, ILO do several programs to strengthen, to protect the migrant workers. One is migration focused skills development. And again, we supported to establish the national migration policy. And again, we work with the ministry and other stakeholders to implement the policy. And again, the advocacy, it is very important for ILO. So ILO always promotes tripartite approach, which is we work with the government, trade unions, and the employers organizations equally. So we work with civil society and trade unions to protect migrant workers' rights. And again, we work with the employers organizations like Employers Federation of Ceylon and Association of Licensed Foreign Employment Agencies to strengthen them to practice the foreign ethical recruitment practice. And again, we do kind of evidence generations for the policy dialogue. We do a lot of research to see what kind of technical lesson we can provide and how migration can be the more strengthened sector. So likewise, we work with the government, trade unions and civil society, plus employers organizations to protect migrant workers' rights. But we see we don't promote migration for employment, but if it is a choice of a migrant worker, so we try to ensure the labor migration is safe, regular, and not.
Just a clarification, you also work with the labor receiving countries, in terms of safety, in terms of, regular pathways and recruitment as well.
Yes, of course, because most of labor receiving countries are member states of International Labour Organization. So we have representation there. So we work with regional and country ILO office to protect migrant workers in destination as well. And again, we work with trade unions, regional trade union federations like South Asian Trade Union Confederation, International Trade Union Confederation, to link destination countries with the country of origin trade unions to protect rights at the destinations.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you, Nishant, for that elaboration. I have some questions to the speakers, but I think, since this is a roundtable, I think we should also open the floor up if there are any questions to the participants here, or from the participants here, or online participants. Maybe, yeah.
Munas, you have raised a very interesting issue. This is the question of how do you use overseas Sri Lankans and use their skills to help Sri Lanka. I think that's one of the objectives. I know that in the last government, the government that sort of until recently, they had an office called the Office of Overseas Sri Lankans. And they were trying to come up with a program where they could get Sri Lankans abroad to come and share their experiences and skills and so on. Now that is one of the problems we have. It's another issue, but I don't know whether that unit will be continued under this government. And that is one of the tragedies of Sri Lanka, that when one government comes and sets up units, another government comes and dismantles them, right? So that's beside the point. But in the whole migration, I see 4 elements. You have the unskilled and semi-skilled workers who go to the Middle East. That's one component. They have their own share of problems. Then you have the skilled and professional categories who go to the Middle East, right? Then you have the skilled and professional categories that go for permanent migration to Europe, North America, and other parts of Asia. So there are different elements. I have heard of 2 countries. One includes South Korea, where they have a very thriving system where their overseas Koreans help the country. They have a very powerful body where they share their skills and so on. And I think that's the level that we need to go to. In my mind, I think this engagement is very important. We should be inviting Sri Lankans of some repute to come and share their skills, and it can be a government, semi-government, it can be a partnership whereby these Sri Lankans are invited to come and stay for a week or so and share their skills and, transfer some of this technology that they have learned. I would also like to ask, what was your sample in doing that survey? What were the numbers like?
It was an online self-administered survey. About 289 responses were there. Thank you, Faisal, for the intervention. Priyanti.
Okay. This works.
Yeah, it works. Yeah.
No, I was actually took the mic to give it to pass it around, not to say something. But I do have a question, and I think that's just a couple of things, right? First thing is that we are talking a lot about employment, migration employment, but you mentioned many other kinds of migrants. And I was just wondering whether there are some people who get left out of this whole conversation. If we certainly when you talk about migration from other countries, there's a whole group of people who who are undocumented migrants, all of those who kind of lose out on some of these institutional arrangements. So that's one question. But the second question is more like about institutional arrangements. I think the gentleman from ILO actually mentioned something about the Philippines, the different ways in which migrant labor is treated. Now, the Philippines has, as far as I know, the Philippine government has agreements with the hosting countries, right? They have agreements that ensure fair treatment, better wages, etc. And I was just wondering whether, and that has made a huge difference because they are actively promoting migration for employment, which we are not, but they still have good agreements, and that makes the hosting governments take those seriously, and their migrants maybe are treated differently. So I was just wondering whether there is any room for Sri Lankan governments to do that as well.
Okay. I think Faisal also raised a point about the Overseas Office of Overseas Sri Lankans. I think, I mean, it still exists, but I don't know whether Mr. Nikharilkar can comment on that. Whether this office still functions, are they still working with the overseas Sri Lankans?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, this unit is very much important. That's why everyone get together and formulated that office under the President's Secretariat. And there was also a process to enact an act for the establishment of overseas Sri Lankan. But however, as we all know that in Sri Lanka, we don't have any political consistent when the government change.
Okay.
But even though that unit is not functioning under the President's Secretariat, the functions of the unit are vested with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So the engagement with the diaspora or the overseas Sri Lankans will be continued under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Yes. Thank you for that. Nishanta, do you want to add anything to what Priyanti just said about the Philippines situation? Yeah?
Yes, of course, yes.
How it's linked.
Correctly pointed out in, yes, we initially can see two advantages in Philippines. One is the language, and again, they have a good skills development, migration focused skills development mechanism. And because of that, they have kind of a strong bargaining power to negotiate bilateral labor agreements. So in Sri Lanka, ILO provide technical support to strengthen the public sector for the design, negotiation, and implementation of bilateral agreements more powerful way. So now we are also in that track. But before us, actually, Philippines has a kind of a good negotiation power because they have good workforce, capacitated workforce. They focus on skills migrant workers. So therefore, they get more advantages from the destination countries. So recently, we concluded a very interesting research. We did a comparability assessment of qualification frameworks between Philippine TESDA system and Sri Lanka NVQ system. So then we saw that some areas actually Sri Lanka is more stronger than Philippine system. For example, skills passport. We have a skills passport, digital skills identification mechanism, but Philippines they don't have. But some of skills development areas, they are more foreign employment focus. For example, we saw diesel motor mechanic, RPL, recognition of prior learning for diesel motor mechanics. In Sri Lanka, German tech we visited there. They take exactly 9 hours to complete the RPL process. But the Philippines, it takes 3 hours. because they focus the requirement, cater to the requirement. So therefore, people easily can get this certification. But again, they keep the quality level as well. So in terms of skills development, their skills development focus is more foreign employment focus. So therefore, they have kind of a advantage. And again, they have the language advantage as well.
Thank you, Nishanta. Any questions or any responses from the participants in Zoom channel?
Munas,
Yes, Anuji.
I would like to answer the first question raised about how do we use the skills of overseas Sri Lankans. There are different skill categories, but highly skilled migrant workers have more potential to contribute to the development of Sri Lanka. And one way we can engage with them is through Sri Lankan professional bodies in foreign countries. I know that there are Sri Lankan professional bodies in Qatar and the UAE, and also in Bahrain also, I think. And these bodies are for like, there's the Engineers Association, Quantity Surveyors Association, Chartered Accountants Association, and such. So in order to get Sri Lankan highly skilled migrants to participate in the development of the country, these organizations can be used as a platform for coordination. And the Sri Lankan overseas missions have connections with these organizations. And if there's a need for a particular skill category, particular type of high-skilled migrant for a development project in Sri Lanka, through the embassies, we can connect to these professional bodies and find people with suitable skills. And there was also a question about agreements with host countries. At the moment, yes, we have, Sri Lanka has signed bilateral agreements and memorandum of understanding with the key destination countries popular among Sri Lankan migrant workers. Like there are ones with Qatar, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, and also countries like Switzerland, Israel, Seychelles also. The primary goal of signing this instrument is to expand the opportunities available to Sri Lankans looking to migrate abroad and increase the foreign exchange flows to the country. But the problem that I see with these agreements is that they talk very little about migrant rights. Sri Lanka, as a single country, it's very difficult to negotiate with destination countries to get better opportunities and better rights for our workers. A good way to do is to go ahead is collective bargaining, getting together with other destination countries. As mentioned, Philippines has better bargaining power because their migration apparatus is well established. Their migrants have a say in the development of their countries. They have overseas Filipinos have voting rights. They are directly involved with the development path of their countries. We don't have that. We are, in fact, Sri Lanka is one of the very few countries where even the legislation has not been amended to include the voting rights of migrant workers. So we have some mechanisms, MOUs, BLAs, to help our migrant workers, but but more work needs to be done. Just having these mechanisms for the namesake won't work. They should be implemented well.
Thank you, Anuji. Any other, Natasha, do you have anything to add, or you will wait for the other round?
Yeah, I think I'll wait. Thank you.
Right. Any questions? Just one. Yes. Then.
Okay, my question is for the representative from the Department of Labor. Are there things like a pre-negotiated contract prior to the migrant worker leaving the country with the stipulated terms and conditions of work, things like your salary, your leave, things like that? Because I really don't see how we can talk about engaging with these workers if even they are basic, they don't have that basic security of a contract of employment that is enforceable, which a Sri Lankan working here would have that. Is that, does that happen? Do you know before you go what your employment is going to be like? What the conditions of employment are going to be like?
Yes, that's a good question. Actually, I'm not from the Department of Labor. I'm from the Ministry of Labor and Foreign Employment. And yes, we also have this bilateral agreement and the MOUs, and also we have the labor contract as well. So when the labor contract, that means the employment opportunities are coming from the country of destination, they should submit all the details with the employment opportunities. That means your orders that should be certified by the embassies or labor section in the Sri Lankan embassies in the country of destination. Then only the agent, they can publish that advertisement. There are three mechanisms happening nowadays. One is G2G, that means government to government, we are sending laborers. That means with Japan, Israel, and Korea. And also there are some other ways are happening like through the licensed foreign employment agencies. The third category is the self-employment. That means they get the job employment through their relatives or friends there. So, however, whenever they register at the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, there should be this labor contract should be signed, and also the job orders should be properly attached by the Sri Lankan embassies there. So when they move to the formal channel or the regular pathway, it is ensured. But if they choose the other pathways like visit visa or student visa, some other means, that was not ensured.
If I may contribute to that question.
Yes, Sanaji, go ahead.
Yes, Sri Lankan migrants receive a contract prior to migration. We did a study on that. And we found that in our sample, around 75% of the respondents stated that they received a contract prior to migration. But the problem that we saw was that there were gender-specific issues in the employment contracts. For example, things like leave entitlement, working hours, those things were not included in the contracts of female migrant workers, most of whom were domestic workers. But with males, those things were included. So there are gender disparities when it comes to these employment contracts.
Thank you, Anaji. There's one more
Yeah, I
question.
have two quick questions. One is about, again, at the policy level. So I'm trying to understand, and I'm not very sure who's able to respond to this question. Maybe, it's also to you, Munas. Are there any other country examples where engagement is at a policy level understood and implemented in a broad sense? So in Sri Lanka, we seem to be having this labor migrant pathway on the one hand, and then we had the overseas Sri Lankan desk, which actually one of the 2 governments ago also, I think this desk existed, it disappeared, it came back again. So can anyone actually talk a little bit about a way that these can be taken in, like, come under one umbrella? A. B, is that even required? Maybe it is not. Maybe it's okay to treat them as 2 separate things. But my point and I think my sort of my unease with this is that we have enough all of us know this, right? We have enough policies in this country, but when it comes to implementation, there are issues. So when we have the fragmented approach to begin with, then obviously there will be gaps, right? And like Priyanti said, there will be people falling through these cracks. I think Natasha also mentioned this. So is there any sort of best practice or any other country example that we can take where these different pathways or different groups of people with different expectations, but they are all linked to Sri Lanka in one way or linked to their country, that they are treated as one group when it comes to policy only? I'm talking about policy only. Of course, their personal preferences, or that how they remit money, whether they use Undial or whether they use formal channels, that's a separate thing. But at a policy level, as far as when it comes to the government, is there a way that they can be treated as one sort of entity?
You want to go?
Yes, first I will respond, then others can compliment me, I think. Yes, the mechanism of the ministries and the government institutions are working. There are some mandate gazetted, then only the ministry has the mandate and activities, they can do it under the purview. So each and every ministry, they have their mandate. So they can't go beyond that. So that is one issue. But when we consider as a whole one umbrella, that the foreign ministry is the best institute, because whoever it is, whether it is migrant worker, the refugee, the asylum seeker, the student, whoever Sri Lankan, we have an obligation to look after them. So the foreign ministry is seeing in one term, as you mentioned, that is overseas Sri Lankan, that including migrant workers as well. But when we consider our ministry, the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, we have separate mandate. We look after only this. When we discuss about these best practices of the other countries, you may heard about that there is a regional forums we are having, like Colombo Process, Abu Dhabi Dialogue. That Colombo Process is the forum where the labor sending countries are get together and we discuss the common issues. And in case of Abu Dhabi Dialogue, the country of destination and the country of origins get together and we discuss the common issues. So now, currently India is chairing the Colombo Process, and there is a proposal to have a new thematic working group for the diaspora engagement. So that in that forum, we can share the best practices from the other countries. Then we can utilize that knowledge also for Sri Lanka to our local context. Thank you.
Do you want to add anything, Nishanta?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So to add what Mr. Khan said, so other than that, actually the best practices, you mean the regional wise, if you take the South Asian countries, so Sri Lanka is doing better than the other countries, because we established the first national labor migration policy in 2008. Then the 2015 we established, Sri Lankan government established the return reintegration sub policy. Then again 2023 we updated and established the national policy on migration for employment. So policy level, actually other countries like Bangladesh follows our policies. So then South Asia, actually Sri Lanka is in a good stand in policy establishment of policies, right? But in implementation, yes, we have to do a lot. But as we discussed earlier, if we take the ASEAN countries, Philippines has more policies to treat migrant workers well. Even when they come back to the country, they give them kind of a red carpet treatment, right? So then they have strong policies. And the common system, skills development, skills recognition, skills referencing. So South Asian countries, now we have a South Asian qualification reference framework. Like within South Asia countries, we can refer our qualification each other. Like for example, where we can refer the NVQ4, for example, within Indian qualification framework. We have that framework. And again, the ASEAN countries, they have a strong framework. Europe, they have European qualification framework. But for example, remittance. So ASEAN countries now they try to establish a common remittance mechanism for ASEAN countries because as an organization, ASEAN is well established. But the missing part in South Asia, SAARC is not that much strong. Actually, it's just a kind of a name. So now, question now, we establish, I am supported to establish South Asian Communication Framework, but we need a secretariat for that because SAARC is not functioning well. So that kind of regional bodies need to be strengthened to practice the common grounds for regional cooperation. But we have common forces, we have done dialogue, we try to establish, try to fill that gap actually. But if there is a strong organization like SAARC for South Asia, we can have a common framework.
I mean, I can also try to respond a little bit about this compartmentalization of the labor and then the diasporas. I think it's also coming from a very political decision, right? I mean, Sri Lanka, I mean, there's Ministry of Foreign Employment, there's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Foreign Affairs Ministry works with the diasporas and the Ministry of Foreign Employment works with the labor migrants. So, I mean, during the war or immediately after the war, this whole conversation about the bad diasporas, there are long distance nationalistic ideas about Sri Lanka. I think, I mean, these conversations contributed to this compartmentalization. I don't think all countries will take the similar approach. I mean, there are countries who work, I mean, if you look at Eritrea, for instance, I mean, for them, they talk about foreign affairs. They include all the migrants as well. So, I mean, it has a huge, a big history to why it's kind of, compartmentalized right now. I think, I mean, it's also time to, reconsider merging or maybe reconsider, I mean, like Mr. Nikarilan said, it needs a lot of work from the government end because there are two ministries set up already. I mean, just to clarify on that, any responses from Natasha or Anoji on this?
Yeah, Munas, just to touch on the whole, policy kind of aspect and do we merge, treating all migrants as the same? I think it's difficult to do that, especially where we are in the country right now. Like now, even in this conversation, we focus very much on labor migrants. And their needs are very different to permanent migrants, or even like if we talk about within those who are permanently migrated and we're talking about the political side of it, also very different. So I feel like at this point, it's good to have that, different policies or different, ministries dealing with it, but also to actually deal with it, like not to dodge it, because I think, like I said before, with the Sri Lankan Tamils living abroad, it's easy to avoid engaging, or if we want to avoid, or it's easy to exclude because it's too complex. And the needs are very different. And there's a trust deficit. Even if you want the Sri Lankan Tamils living abroad, and especially, I'm not like clumping everyone together, but even if you want to engage with them, you've seen previous governments trying to engage through Global Tamil Forum and all these things. There's a lot of pushback because that's a massive trust deficit because they're not being heard. Their demands are not being heard. Their demands for justice and accountability and, looking at Tamil grievances in the country, like it's not been addressed. And I think we need to start when you look, so that's why you have to, I think, look at it differently because they're very different types of engagement and very different needs that are coming into play here.
Thank you, Natasha. Other Zoom or online participants, do you have any questions, any reactions to what we have been discussing so far? So there's opportunity for everyone to talk. We have a little bit more time left. You can also type your questions in chat box. We can see, Okay. Yeah, Priyanti has a question. Yeah.
I don't know whether it's a question, but it's something that got triggered when Natasha was talking, was that we are talking about engagement, but we are talking about creating an engagement, right? But like you said in your introduction, these engagements are happening, right? So particularly when you talk about the Tamil diaspora, they are not engaged with Sri Lanka. They're just engaged with their own communities or their own through remittances, through rebuilding their co-wills, etc. They are very much engaged, and I would assume that that's the same for everyone else. I mean, and also in other contexts, right? So when I lived in London, there was this very amazing dance hall where it was all from the West Indies, and all the profits from that reggae music dance hall or something went to the West. Well, I think it was Jamaica, but I'm not sure. But so that was a diaspora that was making money in London and sending their money back. And I'm sure there are many of those kind of examples, even with Sri Lanka. So when we are talking about creating an engagement, what are we saying is my question.
Yeah. What are we saying about engagement? I think, I mean, like I said, it's it's not something new. It's already, the existing, it's taking shape by different contexts. So it's acknowledging the context, and the engagement also changes. I mean, one way, at times it could be political, it can change it to, non-political and economic. I mean, I can bring in an example of Muslim diaspora. I mean, my work looked at the Muslims in UK. I mean, sorry, before 2010, they were non-political. I mean, their engagement was very economic. I mean, sending money to home, calling back and see, whether they are doing okay. But immediately after the war, when this whole, the anti-Muslim narratives built up in Sri Lanka, they started politically organized. The social mobilization increased, the solidarity movements increased, and then with Digana and various other incidents, Easter Sunday attacks, and then you could see a booming of the organizations among the Muslims Muslims of Sri Lankan origin in UK. So it kind of triggered it, immediately, and they are still very active because they are forming groups, organizations, doing a lot of advocacy to bring change in Sri Lanka. So, I mean, that's why I'm saying, it's this, it's important that we reflect and we look at it in a particular context, and it's a very dynamic and fluid field. So that's why I think we need to talk about engagement. I mean, engagement is it's a very loaded term. I mean, it's it has many dimensions to it. If you don't use the mic, the online participants can't
I
hear.
think there are two elements. It's a very simple thing, two elements. In engagement, one is through remittances, and the other is through seeking Sri Lankans to help in the development of the country. Two simple things, and I think another big engagement, I think, which is necessary, is also that for many years now, the authorities have been trying to get voting rights for Sri Lankans overseas, particularly in the Middle East and so on. Now in the Philippines is done, right? That's another thing that we should be working towards, so that when you have that voting right, then there is a shared responsibility of Sri Lankans to be able to come and say, okay, I like to do something in this country, because they have they have a stake. So in terms of the discussion today, I think remittances and engagement in terms of seeking the skills of those Sri Lankans in sharing in the development of the country, two main elements.
Okay.
Munas, can I add a third element to that, if that's okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't catch the gentleman's name who just gave that input. But yeah, I would like to also, like you spoke about remittances development, but I think we always forget the third element, which is when it comes to international relations, right? Because whether it's the Tamil diaspora who has been very influential in, shaping foreign policy decisions in their host countries or at the international, level as well, or whether it's the Sri Lankan, whether it's the Sinhala or Muslim diaspora, I think those groups that are permanently settled or hold citizenship in those host countries also have a very key role to play in how our foreign policy and foreign relations are shaped, I think, as well. And that's why I think also answering Priyanti's question about whether it's about creating engagement and with the Tamil transnational groups of the Tamil diaspora, whatever you like to call it, it's also about creating constructive engagement, because right now it's a lot of contention, a lot of opposition, and that's coming from not having a proper positive or constructive engagement with those groups. So it's also about thinking about how do we reshape, or how do we, like Munas use the word, reimagine those engagements.
Thank you, Natasha. So we talked a lot about, I think this discussion so far highlighted a lot of barriers. I think constraints, I think we did talk a lot about, constraints. We did talk about trust issue, trust in a different sense. For instance, the trust the Tamil diasporas have with the government, or whether there's trust or not, is one particular type of trust. And then if you look at the labor migrants, their trust is mainly about about treating the rights issue, treating the contract issue, labor law violations and all. So the trust is one kind of broad barrier that we talked about. And then the rights, I think when it comes to labor migration, I think the rights, everyone almost raised this issue of rights on, right to have a right employment, right to vote, various right issues. And we did talk about another barrier, that is like compartmentalization, which is linked to the policy issue. How the policy can whether there should be a uniform policy to treat these different groups, or whether there should be different. So that's another type of barrier we talked about. And Natasha raised, justice, accountability, and the political rights, all as sort of barriers that we need to address to facilitate different forms of engagement. I think, we can also talk a little bit about. The question is whether there is an opportunity right now. Given how the context has changed, is there an opportunity to engage with different migrant groups and diasporas? If so, what are the opportunities that we have? I think some opportunities were raised already. Mr. Nikaril Kant already raised the remittance as an opportunity, and there's also policy in place. There are some institutional mechanisms in place already. Those are opportunities to facilitate engagement. But in terms of supporting support from diaspora, support from migrant workers or overseas Sri Lankans. I mean, what can be done better to facilitate this this engagement? Any thoughts on that, Anoji? Do you want to go ahead first?
Yes, we talked about remittances. Currently, the Sri Lankan government mainly engages with Middle Eastern migrants by incentivizing remittances. But beyond this encouragement for inward remittances, little is done to guide them on the sustainable use of remittances. And I believe this is a missed opportunity both for migrants and the Sri Lankan economy. Because most of the migrants in the Middle East, whether highly skilled or unskilled, spend the bulk of their earnings on non-income generating avenues. While a key reason for this consumption-driven extravagant expenditure is their desire to achieve upward social mobility, it is also due to a lack of awareness about viable income generating investments. So well-designed financial literacy programs could help these migrants to make better choices, which would of course shield them from shocks like job losses. But at the same time, it would increase remittances to sectors sectors that generate more value for Sri Lanka. And it would create ripple economic effects like employment opportunities in the country, support for small and medium-sized enterprises also.
Anoji, can I ask Natasha? I mean, within the Tamil diaspora, I mean, do you see the current context has given any sort of an opportunity to engage them, better, or do you see that the interest levels have dwindled down?
No, I think we're going further away from creating constructive engagement, because one is, I mean, in 2021, the previous Gotabaya Rajapaksa's government outright rejected the UN resolution, withdrew from it. We're still withdrawn from it, but we still have like these recommendations and aspects that need to be implemented hanging over our heads. And I think now it's worse because of the economic crisis, the priorities are shifting further away from justice and reconciliation. And I think while it's important to address, we have to address the economic issues, we also have to not forget these grievances that are just looming over, because the longer we put it off, or the longer we brush it under the carpet, it's just going to create further kind of divisions within Sri Lanka, within communities in Sri Lanka, but also this opposition and contentious kind of engagement from Sri Lankan Tamils living abroad. So I think while we address the economic issues, we also have to look at the political issues. We have to look at minority rights. We have to ensure that all citizens are included in, whether it's political, economic, whatever the process is. And I think just advancing the process of justice and reconciliation is like the halfway point of trying to have an opportunity to build better relationship with Sri Lankan Tamils. And I know like many people think that, why are we even talking about it? Why do we have to engage? Because they have such a huge influence, and in this system we live in, we need to have we need to have friends, international support and friends within the international system. So that's why it's important to have a positive and a genuine, not just to tick a box or, just, yeah, we're doing something and just, move on. But really to have genuine kind of move forward from our past, because we can't forget our violent past, and we can't just, move on without addressing justice issues. So yeah, that's half a point, but then there's so much more. I think we're just taking baby steps still, because there's so much more like political solutions and all these things that would come after.
Right. Thank you, Natasha. I go to Mr. Nikhil Kant. I think, do you see at the moment, I mean, is there an opportunity to better engage with the migrants? I mean, you mentioned the remittances. My question is more in terms of participation, engaging them in decision making. Is there an opportunity right now?
Well, it is beyond my purview of the mandate, but there are some thought. As our expert mentioned that we need to have an engagement with the diaspora is Sri Lankan diaspora, whether it is Tamil or Sinhala or Muslim. I think comparing the Tamil, Sinhala, Muslim in Sri Lanka, the diaspora is more divided there in the background. So it is very difficult to convince them there. However, we can engage them when we have the good relationship, and we have to ensure that we are also considering their demand and justice. So, and also still they have the contacts with their relatives there. So anyway, they will communicate with them and they will support for them. So that automatically enrich Sri Lanka anyway, whether it is Jaffna or whether it is Batikolo, it's all around Sri Lanka. If it is in economic term, anyway, it will contribute to the Sri Lankan economy anyway. And also we can utilize their knowledge, their expertise knowledge, while we engage with the universities. If they are skills migrants or the professionals, we can engage with the universities on the short-term basis, or they can come. We can create a pool of people, so they can on and off come here and they can contribute in their contribution through the skill and also the culture. We are always talk about brain drain. But there is a component like brain gain as well. Whenever they go there, they will learn a lot of things. When they come here, so we have to have the mechanism to capitalize that also. That is one of the mechanism is RPL. So we can get their gain knowledge recognized in our education system, and we can utilize that standard for the better engagement in Sri Lanka also. That is one economic in term. And also we can utilize them as the ambassadors for Sri Lanka to promote Sri Lanka, like for tourism. The Sri Lankan tourism is booming. So our Sri Lankan diaspora, they can promote in their host countries about Sri Lanka, the good picture of Sri Lanka. That also will positively contribute while increasing the tourism as well. So that is my thought.
Yeah.
The problems is the Sri Lankan identity. We identify ourselves as Sinhalese, Muslims, Tamils, Burghers, and so on. And so there is a huge trust deficit. I mean, in terms of the Tamil diaspora, also it's the same thing. I mean, so that Sri Lankan identity is something that we need to start working on, so that everyone establish yourself as Sri Lankan first, and then secondly, as the ethnic group. I mean, that's the biggest problem that we have.
Right. I have one more question to Mr. Nishant. I think Mr. Nikhilkant raised it already. You mentioned the return. I mean, the policy has a return reintegration, segment in it. So how do you think this particular aspect in policy can be, implemented better for, to engage the Sri Lankans or overseas Sri Lankans in a better way?
Yes, Munas, before that issue, Dr. Anand, very good, financial literacy. So we receive remittance, but the management is an issue. After spending 2-3 years in abroad, especially this domestic work category, when they come back, so their house is not completed. Construction is not completed. A lot of issues. Then again, they try to remigrate. Like more than the reintegrate, they try to remigrate. So it's one thing. And Mr. Faisal mentioned 2 things. One is the financial remittance. Maybe it's a continuous process or a one-time investment. But again, how about the social remittance? As Mr. Kant said, they come with gained skills, set of gained skills. So how we can use their skills for the country development? How we can absorb their skills to the employment market here, right? So reintegration. We need strong policies, but nowadays actually we can see today morning we had a discussion about if something happened in Middle East, how we can bring down people here. But the past experience, when they come here, again they want to go back because here they don't have enough job opportunities. And again, the recognition of their skills and certification mechanism is not efficient. Now, actually, TVC with the support of ILO, they have digitalized the RPL process. So there are steps have been taken, but the awareness is not enough because people don't know about those facilities. So skills recognition is one thing need to be strengthened. And again, the creating job opportunities here. Otherwise, they can't reintegrate to the labor market. So it is one thing. And again, the like change of their perceptions, like they can stay here if there is any better support to start some small and medium scale businesses here. So then they stay. But we have a kind of institution like SIYB Association, so they can support for them. And again, the missing part, the capital, right? So now some of organization like Koika, so they try to support the Korean returnees to start their own businesses here. But it's like they focus on the Korean returnees, but it's not a holistic approach. So then the reintegration now in the national migration policy, current policy, it has a separate strategy for the integration. But a lot of works need to be done to strengthen the reintegration, especially to absorb their skills to the economic development in country of origin.
Thank you, Nishant. Do you have any other questions? Priyanti, yes.
I just have two things to say. One is when I think it was when I was when I was the director of CEPA, for example, I had all these wealth managers, right, come and ask me. I didn't have much wealth, but they wanted to know they wanted to tell me how to invest my wealth, right? That wasn't any government thing. These are private. Why do those people not go to all these and advise the diaspora who are coming back, right? I mean, it's a business for them. And there's the people who come back from the Middle East probably had a lot more money than the director of CEPA. So I just think that might have been one thing. But that was one thought that came to my mind. And I think we discussed that, I think, at some point when I was there. But the other thing I was going to ask was, recently we've seen a lot of political parties engaging with the international diaspora just before the elections, right? And I don't know whether that used to happen before. I doubt it. And maybe that was to raise money or what, I don't know. But will that have an impact in the future?
Yeah, I think good question to maybe wind up the discussion. I mean, any thoughts from the speakers on that? I mean, the kind of engagement with the political parties here and what it means. Anyone would like to go first?
I can just add in a bit to that. I think that is like a whole other, I mean, it's interesting, and I think we see it more prominently now. I think we have more access to information to see like how these political parties are engaging with Sri Lankans abroad. I mean, from the singular majority parties, I think a lot of it, I don't know about the main reasons for it or anything, but I feel like there was a lot, I think in the not the last presidential election, but the election before that, a lot of Sri Lankans came from abroad to vote. And those were people who had like citizenship, right, or dual citizenship. So I think, again, it's a different way of engaging politically. I can talk for the Tamil, Sri Lankan Tamil aspect, and how there is constant engagement and constant engagement with Tamil political parties in Sri Lanka. A lot of the, their kind of standpoints align sometimes with the Tamil political parties, and that kind of support is there. There's a lot of like Tamil politicians who go to Canada, for example. I was there once, where they go to talk about the issues and, gain support and gain financial support and investment. And so that kind of engagement is definitely there. It has been there for a while. I don't know about what it would mean for the future, but I think there'll be definitely, and is happening, more of that engagement because of how easy it is now to engage across borders without actually having to travel and, things like that. But yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Natasha. Anyone else would like to comment on that? I mean, my understanding is that it's also like Natasha said, it's very easy to engage with them on social media. Use. It's also about creating a discourse of like, for instance, when a group of them arrives just before election, it creates a huge issue, and say that a lot of people are coming in, and then build a support base. So it also needs to be studied. Yes, they do engage, but to what extent that engagement makes a difference here, and whether it makes a difference. I think it's like the current migration wave, which is also not studied, but it's probably a narrative built around some of the anecdotes and what's happening out there. So yeah, it's something that needs to be further studied and understood. If our participants and the speakers don't have any questions or any additions, I think we can close the session. Any final reflections or comments? Yeah.
A very quick question about the voting rights. What I think that seems to be one thing that is cutting across all of this. At least to me, I see Natasha nodding, so hopefully that means yes or not. I don't know. But what is our role? What is blocking this? Because as someone said, it's been done in lots of other countries. Why is it not done in Sri Lanka? Any thoughts from you, San? What can we do as researchers to push this through?
I think that voting rights also one of the basic rights of migrant workers. I think that is still there, but the accessibility or enjoying that right is the problem. Well, because we also engage with to get the voting rights. We had some consultation with the Election Commission, and they're also working on that. There was a parliamentary subcommittee also formulated to study this. But there are some issues raised because our migrant workers are scattered. So when we arrange one voting booth to our embassy, it is impossible to one person who travel from 400 kilometers to cast a vote. So that is the cost concern is one of the issue. And if they want to come for the vote to Sri Lanka, that also another issue. So we need to have any electronic voting system to get their vote. So that also have some consequences. But the Election Commission also working on it, but it is not materialized. But this was already discussed, and it is in the process, but it is getting delayed.
Natasha, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I'm not sure about the process, but I definitely, I mean, we know why we can speculate why it might be blocked also. I mean, especially if definitely if you're not a citizen, that's not a question. But if you are a citizen and having the ability to vote electronically or postal votes or whatever way is important, but it's also, you can't control that, right? It's a very difficult thing to control when people are not within the borders of the country. And I think that is probably one reason to avoid it. But it's definitely important as citizens to have the full rights wherever you are. And if you are expected to invest or economically engage, or if you're expected to do all of that, then also you need to be able to enjoy your rights as citizens, full rights as citizens. So that I think Anoji mentioned as well, like it's a give and take, it's a two-way street. You can't really only expect and not really give back. And it's not only voting rights, any other sort of rights, right to have land, all this. I think there's a question about other countries, like India has the overseas Indian citizenship, doesn't allow voting rights, but allows, easy access to, even if you're not a citizen of India, to have land rights and, to be able to buy land and invest and without, a lot of accessibility and, bureaucracy and red tape issues. But I mean, those are things we can continue to talk about for hours, I think, but yeah, I'll stop there.
If I may add to that, globally, Sri Lanka is one of the very few countries that is yet to make legal provisions allowing non-resident citizens to vote in elections from abroad. And while allowing Sri Lankans, we have been talking about this for like around 20 years. And from time to time, especially during election times and post-election, there have been committees appointed, but no concrete action has been taken. And while allowing overseas Sri Lankans to vote might be an expensive endeavor, many lower in middle income countries have already done it, like Philippines. And accessible, it's of course it's difficult to have one booth in a country and make overseas Sri Lankans to go to that place when the land space is massive. But there are other ways of permitting overseas residents to vote, like there's postal voting, proxy voting, electronic voting. They don't have to go to the diplomatic mission per se to vote. And Sri Lanka does not also need to adopt all these methods simultaneously or implement overseas voting across all countries. It could be a gradual phased introduction, maybe starting with the Middle Eastern region where there are a lot of migrant workers and they don't get the citizenship in Middle East. So they have a huge say in the future of Sri Lanka because they have to ultimately return to Sri Lanka. So it's time that we take the step in the right direction, I think.
Okay, thank you, Anoji. I think we are a little behind date, but I think we also started a little late, so it's okay. If there are any additional feedback or comments, I can close the session. Thank you. I would like to thank speakers, Natasha, Anoji, Mr. Nikhil Khan, Mr. Nishant, for joining this discussion. I mean, despite your busy schedules, I know you all have lots of things to do and it's lunchtime. And the timing is also little odd for us to start at 1 o'clock, but you all made it. And thank you very much for joining. Thank you for BCIS team, Director Priyanti Fernando and Amali Vedagadara, and you. I think everybody supported this organization. Thanks and thank you very much for CEPA team also to support and for being here. Yeah, I mean, next steps, I think, we are hoping to produce a small article based on this discussion, and I think this conversation needs to happen more often, and which also needs to, it needs to take place at high level as well, given the the context of the country and the need for it. So I'm hopeful that we can take this conversation to another forum. For the in-person participants, there's tea and coffee we have arranged. Unfortunately, not for you, Natasha and Anuji, and other online participants. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll close this session today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All these hiccups at the beginning, but it's upper state. So we are learning as we go along.